What's the best power move you've ever witnessed someone pull off in real life? I worked fast food in college, at Taco Bell. I'd requested time off for a trip halfway across the country to visit a friend, and everyone had known about it for over a month. When the new schedule came out, though, I was on it all week. I brought it to the manager and said, "Yeah, I'm not supposed to be scheduled this week." She looked at me and said, "Well, I see you on here, so you need to be here or find someone to cover you." I just shrugged and said, "No. Everyone's known for over a month that I'm going to Georgia. Schedule me all you want, but I'm going to Georgia. Good luck with that." Same place, Taco Bell. I got really sick once, with both an ear and throat infection at the same time. I couldn't even swallow and had to strain just to make a sound, which came out as more of a whisper. I called in the night before my shift, right after getting back from urgent care. The manager insisted I still come in. When I told them what I had, they doubled down and said it was my responsibility to find someone to cover for me, even though the rule was that only applied if you called in less than 2 hours before your shift. This was more than 8 hours' notice. I wasn't polite about it. I said, "I am sick as heck, and it's well over your 2-hour limit. Not my job to do this. Either you find someone to cover, or you're going to be short-staffed because I'm going to bed." Then I hung up and went back to sleep. I eventually quit because of the awful management. By law, anyone over 18 was required to get a break, but not there. The manager would go into the system, log a break for you, and then make you keep working. Because it showed up in the computer as taken, there was no way to prove you hadn't actually had one. After I got injured, they still wouldn't give me breaks and kept scheduling me for longer shifts than my doctor allowed, even though his restrictions were highlighted in his note. One day, after they once again refused to give me my legally required break, I just walked out halfway through my shift and never went back. Story 2. I had a friend who worked as an HVAC tech. He kept having problems with this restaurant that kept towing his car when he parked at his girlfriend's place. She lived upstairs and had 2 parking spaces with her condo, both legally hers. After getting towed one too many times, he decided he'd had enough. He had a source for the odorant they use in natural gas, that strong rotten egg smell, and he put a few drops near the restaurant's outdoor seating area, then waited. Sure enough, the fire department showed up and shut the place down for the weekend while they investigated the gas leak. After that, he started parking in a paylot 2 blocks away and began towing restaurant patrons' cars whenever they parked in his girlfriend's assigned spaces. The cops got involved, and surprisingly, they took his side. Eventually, he teamed up with a group of condo owners who had also been towed from their own spots, and together they went after the restaurant. They managed to get its liquor license suspended for 180 days. That was enough to put the place out of business. Story 3. I was in a nearly 10-year relationship that had long since turned toxic and emotionally abusive. I'd tried to break up with him twice during that last year, but both times he manipulated me into staying. Then came a warm day in late June, just a few weeks shy of what would have been our 10-year anniversary. I was finally ready. I'd talked to friends and family the day before to build up my confidence and reassure myself I was doing the right thing. I went over to his house and started the talk. Things got tense quickly. He grew upset and scoffed at the idea that I'd throw 10 years away. The conversation dragged on, emotions running high on both sides. Then, out of nowhere, he got very calm. He shifted the conversation completely and asked if I wanted to go to the local coffee shop for a sandwich. I was wary and confused, but I agreed. We ate in almost complete silence, the tension thick, the air awkward. Afterward, we walked down to the docks to look at the water. It was quiet, uncomfortable, and I could feel the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. I was getting anxious because it was nearly the time he usually left for work, and the breakup hadn't been mentioned again. Eventually, we started heading back to his house, cutting it close for when he'd need to leave. I remember feeling uneasy, like something about his sudden calm didn't sit right. We got back to his place, and I stood near the back of his car, still feeling the weird tension from that awkward little detour, while he headed toward the front door. "So, what about what we were discussing before this?" I asked. He glanced at me and said, "We can't finish that conversation in 15 minutes. "Well, I can," I replied. "It's over." Then I walked straight to my car and left. In that moment, it was crystal clear what he'd been doing. That whole coffee and docs routine had been a last-ditch attempt to stall and derail the breakup just like before, but this time, it didn't work. Story 4. I used to work nights as a cashier at a deli car convenience store. When the daytime manager quit, my boss asked me to switch to days and take on the manager's responsibilities. I said I would, with a pay raise. He assured me it would only be for a week, so I agreed to do him the favor. That week turned into a month. I was now working 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. during the week and 6 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. on weekends. For reference, my boss didn't even know how to run the register, let alone handle any of the actual work. After a month, I went into his office, basically a supply closet with a computer, to discuss the raise again. He asked if he could take me to dinner to talk about it. I said no, and told him he had one more week to find someone. A week later, on Friday, I asked him again for a raise, or at least a bonus for everything I had been doing. He asked about dinner again. I said no again. Then he said no to the raise and no to the bonus. So I told him I quit. I made it very clear that he would need to show up the next day and Sunday from 6 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. because I would not be there. I said this to a man who didn't even know how to open his own register. Then I walked back to the counter like nothing happened. 10 minutes later, he came out, opened his wallet, and handed me a $100 bill as my bonus. I took it, put it in my purse, and said, "Thank you. I'm still quitting, though." The look on his face was incredible. An hour later, I paid myself for the week and walked out. Story 5. I used to work as a bartender at a walkabout bar. For anyone outside the UK, that's an Australian-themed chain of bars and clubs. One night, this woman and 2 men came up to the bar. The only way to describe them is that they looked like they'd just come straight from a Jeremy Kyle taping, trying to figure out which of the woman's cousins was the father of her baby. Doing my job, I walked over and started with, "Hi, what can I get you?" Before I could even finish the sentence, the woman shouted, "Large rosé." "No, please, no thank you." Nothing. Typical behavior for that place, honestly. I just brushed it off and started pouring her wine. There's only about half a large glass left in the bottle, but there's more chilling in the fridge. As I turn around to grab a fresh one, she suddenly yells, "Oi, keep pouring." At this point, I've built up a solid tolerance for this kind of nonsense after years in customer service, so I don't react. I simply turn back toward her, hold up the empty bottle so she can see, and start to explain, "Bottle's empty, I'm going to..." Of course, she cuts me off mid-sentence with, "Well, you better friggin' get another one." At that point, I stopped what I was doing, turned to face her, and set the empty bottle on the bar with one hand while picking up her glass with the other. "I'm not serving you," I said. "You're a loud, obnoxious bish, and I can't be arsed." She just stood there for a moment, stunned, her jowls actually wobbling in disbelief, before finally sputtering, "Well, that's not good customer service, is it?" I smiled and said, "Well, that's not good customer behavior, and since I handed in my 2 weeks' notice a couple of days ago, screw it." I turned, poured her wine straight into the bin, and walked into the back room where the shift leader was standing. "Yo," I said, "some stupid bish is about to file a complaint about me." He blinked. "Oh, why?" "I don't know. I'll tell you the details later," I replied, then headed back out to the bar and went right on serving everyone else while she stood there fuming, waiting for someone else to help her. After about 10 minutes, I'd cooled off a bit and decided maybe I'd been too harsh. I went over to try to diffuse things. "I'm not going to serve you," I said, "but I'm not cutting you off. Someone else She cut me off again, shouting, "I don't give a crap, just pour my friggin' drink." I shrugged and said, "Okay, well, now you're friggin' cut off. Bye." Then I walked away, tapping each of the other bartenders on the shoulder as I passed, making sure she saw me pointing her out and telling them not to serve her. She later demanded to speak to a manager, but left before one was available. I got off completely scot-free. Honestly, it was a good day. Story 6. I am not sure if this belongs here. A little over a week ago, on Canadian Thanksgiving, I brought a very close friend to meet my family. I called my aunt beforehand to make sure it was all right to bring her, since we were gathering at her house, and she told me it was fine. I invited my friend because my family rarely speaks to me, even though it is a large family. I am about 4 years younger than everyone else there, so when they do talk to me, they tend to speak as if I am naive or would not understand what they are talking about, even though I do. Most of the time they avoid talking to me beyond basic niceties, and I thought bringing a friend would help with my anxiety. Once we arrived, no one looked at me or my friend. Everyone gathered tightly in the living room and even crowded the doorway so that I could not have gone in even if I had wanted to. My friend and I sat at a table right beside the opening to the living room, since the house is fairly open concept. We were not hiding or trying to be antisocial. We simply wanted to sit down. My mother came over and told us to stop being antisocial. She asked if I had introduced my friend, whom I'll call Rebecca, to everyone. I said no because no one had come over to talk to me, and I did not think I should walk into the living room, raise my voice over everyone, and announce who she was, especially since she also has anxiety, and that would have been uncomfortable for both of us. Then my aunt joined my mother and repeated that we were being antisocial. A moment later, my cousin came over and in a very rude, "Can I speak to your manager?" tone said loudly, "Also, when you invite someone to a party, it's rude not to introduce them to everyone," clearly trying to embarrass me so everyone could hear. It came completely out of nowhere. I just stood there staring at her, stunned. Then I felt embarrassed because I assumed that must be what everyone else was thinking too. I got over it quickly and walked over to everyone, except that cousin, and said loudly, "Hi, Auntie, Uncle, Cousin, this is my friend Rebecca." I made sure she was within earshot so she would hear it. Then I went over to her toddler, introduced Rebecca to them and to her husband, but deliberately avoided her. I could tell she was furious. She kept giving me dirty looks the entire time. She causes drama constantly in the family, and honestly, it was worth it. Story 7. I lost one of the best managers I ever had because someone pulled a power move on him. Every morning, he'd get an email from another manager asking why certain accounts hadn't been handled. He'd spend all morning double-checking every one of them, only to find they had been handled. He finally called her to explain that everything was in order. She said, "Oh, okay, cool." And then, the very next day, sent him the exact same email. Later, he found out the big boss was being BCC'd on every single one of those emails. So, from the big boss's perspective, it looked like this guy had unhandled accounts every single day because he was seeing those BCC'd emails, but never the follow-ups showing that everything had been taken care of. Meanwhile, the manager doing the complaining handled all the replies privately, so the boss never knew the truth. In the end, he was fired, even though he'd done nothing wrong, and he had a pregnant wife at home at the time. The takeaway: if you're getting repeated emails like that at work, there's a chance someone higher up is being BCC'd. When you respond, make sure you're not giving them a one-sided story. Edit. People are right. Hitting reply all won't reach someone in the BCC line. So, what's the move? Honestly, if it's a situation like that, where someone keeps pestering you or sending misleading messages, it's best to CC your own manager or HR when you reply. That way, there's a transparent record and no one can quietly build a false narrative behind your back. And no, you don't need to loop in a VP over every little thing. Just make sure someone in your chain knows the full story. Story 8. A friend and I were driving home after a night out when we were pulled over by the police for speeding. The officer approached our vehicle, and my friend who was driving said, "I didn't even see you. Where were you parked?" The officer replied that he was parked at the bottom of an apartment building driveway with a blind spot. My friend responded, "Well, I own that building. It's private property, and I've asked you guys several times not to park there because I don't want my building to have a reputation as a speed trap." A few minutes later, after verifying the information, the officer returned to the car, apologized, and let us go on our way. Story 9. My first boyfriend and I were out at a restaurant in the middle of the week. It was nearly empty, but for some reason the hostess seated us directly across from the only other couple there. We were 18, and the other couple looked to be around 30. The man was going on and on about his boring job, while the woman looked completely uninterested. He was talking so loudly that my boyfriend and I couldn't even have our own conversation. Finally, he stopped talking, and there was this long, awkward silence. After a moment, my boyfriend looked up at me and said, "So, do you put out?" I burst out laughing, and the woman at the other table quickly covered her grin. The man scoffed, said, "Good one, buddy," and tossed his napkin down like he'd just lost an argument or something. I'm not a man, so I have no idea what kind of power play that was, but I'll never forget it. Story 10. I have a good personal one. I worked at a major office retail store for a while in the tech section. Everyone was paid just above minimum wage, except for the department leads who made $10 an hour. Our tech lead moved away and they didn't replace him right away, so I busted my back, making sure everything was stocked and running smoothly. Black Friday was coming up and company policy said nobody could take time off. No ifs, ands, or buts. All hands on deck. Still, I asked for the day off, hoping maybe they'd make an exception. My girlfriend's uncle was usually deployed, and this was one of the few years he'd be home for Thanksgiving. I really wanted to finally meet him. They told me no. After our tech lead left, I kept running the department for about a month, basically doing the job myself. Eventually, I went to the store manager and asked if I could officially take the position, along with the raise that came with it. He sat me down and explained that they weren't sure yet. He said if I worked really hard for the next 6 months, they'd reevaluate and see if I was fit for the role then. All the other department managers thought I'd already be given the job and were surprised when it didn't happen. I just smiled, said, "Thank you for your time," and walked straight to the work computer. I typed out this exact message. Store manager's name. This is an official 9-day notice that my last day working here will be the day before Thanksgiving. IK Izzy. I printed it out, walked right back into his office, and handed it to him. He read it, looked up, and asked if I could stay for Black Friday. I told him, "You couldn't pay me enough." Story 11. There was this kid from my class in high school who was late for physics one day. When he finally showed up, the teacher said, "When you're late, you know you're not supposed to come in through that door, Jacob." It was a warm summer day, and the fire exit door was open. About 10 minutes later, we heard footsteps on the metal stairs outside. Our classroom was room 403 on the 4th floor. After a moment, Jacob casually walked in through the fire exit like nothing had happened, took his seat, and acted as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Story 12. I was at a Mexican restaurant on Cinco de Mayo. The place was absolutely packed, yet somehow there were only 2, maybe 3, waiters on staff. We'd been there for about 40 minutes, had our drinks, but still hadn't even gotten to order food. Then this guy at the next table stood up and just started taking people's orders and running them to the kitchen. The other waiters actually seemed to appreciate it, since people were starting to get pretty irritated until that point. He didn't take my table's order, but he handled one nearby, and he seemed like a fun guy. A friend ran into him a few months later and said he's really cool in person. Story 13. This was back in high school, in the 90s. I had a friend who was really small and often got picked on, but he never did anything about it. Neither did the rest of us when it happened to us. It never got physical, so who cared? We figured it was better to use words, not fists. One day, we were talking when a big guy from his grade suddenly grabbed him in a hold for no reason. Out of nowhere, my friend kicked one leg forward, and the next thing we knew, the big guy was on his back and pinned. My friend had him by the throat and calmly said, "Will you stop it now?" The big guy nodded and never messed with him again. Turns out my friend's dad taught Shotokan karate, and my buddy was incredibly skilled. I'd never seen anyone move that fast. He took down someone 75 pounds heavier than him without breaking a sweat. Apparently, he even helped his dad train students. He'd never mentioned it before because, to him, it just wasn't a big deal. At that age, girls and cars were far more interesting. Story 14. It was a small thing, but funny as hell to me. I was driving somewhere with my brother in the middle of the night. We stopped at a gas station, and as we were about to pull away, this kid ran up to the car. My brother rolled down the window, and the kid asked him to buy him some cigarettes. My brother told him, straight up, to screw off. The kid got pissed and told my brother to F off for disrespecting him. Said something like, "You better drive off like a bitch, or me and my buddies will beat you like the pussies you are." My brother just smirked and said, "Oh, sorry, sir. I guess I need my buddies then," and flashed his badge. The kid's eyes went wide, and he bolted. Story 15. I'm in the U.S. Army, and these days it's really easy to get kicked out. Recently, an investigation started on some of the guys I work with. They were accused of using and selling drugs, but there was zero evidence to support it. No drugs, no positive urinalysis, no paraphernalia, nothing. Despite that, the chain of command tried to make a power move, and those guys were still going to get kicked out. Obviously, they all lawyered up and started defending themselves. The process dragged on so long that a couple of the guys were about to get out of the army anyway. So, what does the chain of command do? They extend their service just so they can keep the paperwork going and finish kicking them out. That's when things really started popping off. So, Soldier 1 digs through the regs and finds one that clearly states you can't extend a soldier with the express intent of chaptering them out. He prints it out, drops it right on the commander's desk, and absolutely loses it. This is the same commander who had extended him in the first place, the one who kept him from leaving the army and forced his pregnant wife to drive a U-Haul full of their stuff across the country to his home of record. Now that regulation has made its way all the way up to the brigade commander and is still under review. But honestly, he's going to win this one. Soldier 2 and Soldier 3 went straight to the top. They wrote their congressman. Soldier 3 even filed a complaint with the Inspector General, which is a huge deal and a nightmare for the chain of command. Soldier 3, who was the first to be accused and basically started this whole mess, went to trial to defend himself, and his lawyer absolutely demolished the accuser in court. Today, Soldier 3's charges were officially dropped, which pretty much paves the way for Soldier 1 and Soldier 2 to walk away with a mean-ass dub. That's a power move. Story 16. My old company required a doctor's note if you missed 3 days of work for being sick. We also had a PTO system, meaning sick time and vacation time were the same thing. On the third day, I called my boss and told them I still wasn't feeling any better. They asked me to email a doctor's note. I told them I didn't go to the doctor. It was the flu. You just have to wait it out. The VP basically said I either needed to get a note or come in. So I came in my pajamas, clocked in, filled out my PTO request for the rest of the week, and promptly puked in my wastebasket. That set off a chain reaction of sympathy pukes, and I was sent home for the day because, guess what? I was actually sick. Story 17. This is something I did myself. Not even that great of a story, but I still want to tell it. One time, I was at a bar with a girl I was hanging out with and a few friends. 6 of us in total. At some point, the girl's ex walked in and came over to our table to make awkward conversation. The girl was clearly uncomfortable, and honestly, so was everyone else. So, I got up, went to the bar, and ordered 6 shots. I brought them back, handed one to each person at our table, and raised mine for a toast. The girl's ex got the message and left us alone. Story 18. Back in college, I worked a work-study job as a campus security patrol guy. Our job was pretty simple. Walk around the dorms during the midnight to 6 a.m. shift, make sure all the doors were locked, and check that everything was quiet. We had radios to call the campus police if anything serious happened, but no weapons, no badges, and no real authority. We had to keep a paper log on 3-part forms for everything we found, and report our location whenever base randomly called us on the radio. One morning after my shift, I got called into the office of the fat wannabe Southern sheriff who ran the campus security department. He told me I was fired for failing to turn in the log from my partner and me the night before. Apparently, he'd found out I was friends with one of the other guys on the team, and he didn't like people working shifts with their friends. I told him I had turned in my log, but of course, it was nowhere to be found when he showed me a pile of everyone else's reports. But what old WW didn't know was that I was active in student government and had become acquainted with the Dean of Student Housing. One day in his office, I'd noticed piles of the pink copies of the campus security logs, and he told me they arrived first thing every morning. I went straight there as soon as I left the chief's office, and sure enough, there was the pink copy of my log from the night before. The dean called the chief and told him there must be some mistake with my log, since he was looking at the copy that had come from the chief's office less than an hour earlier. My firing was rescinded, and the old chief never spoke to me or met my eyes again. From that point on, I kept that job for as long as I wanted it. Story 19. I worked at an ice cream shop right after I finished high school. The guy who ran it was a complete idiot, and the place barely functioned. I was scheduled far more than anyone else. It was supposed to be a part-time job, but I was working 39 hours a week. One night, while closing up with the owner, I shook his hand and said, "All right, man, I'll see you tomorrow." He looked at me, puzzled, and asked, "Are you scheduled tomorrow?" "Yeah, I think so," I said. He said, "You're not on the schedule, but I'll call you tomorrow to let you know one way or the other." The next day came and went without a call. So around 6 in the evening, I went out to dinner with my girlfriend and her parents. In the middle of it, he called me, furious, and started yelling because I hadn't shown up. I reminded him what he'd said the night before, and he stammered, Yeah? Well, you're fired. I replied, You've got a bunch of trainees who've been working less than 3 days, and you've got me. Good luck making a profit when your other employees don't even know how to work the register yet. He went silent for a few seconds, then muttered, I'll see you Monday, and hung up. I stayed there for a few more months until one day, when we were working together and he was taking inventory. He came out from the back while I was helping a group of customers and shouted, Legato, have you been stealing candy bars? I looked at him, then at the crowded store, and just walked out, dropping my apron on the floor as I left. About 6 months later, the store burned down, probably for the insurance money. Story 20. Poker night at a friend's house, $40 buy-in, winner takes all, unless the last two decide to split, with 8 people playing. By the time we were down to 3 players, we'd been at it for almost 5 hours. I had the most chips and was ready to go home, so I suggested splitting it 3 ways. I'd take 40% and the other 2 could take 30% each. They both said no. I brought it up 4 more times over the next hour, but my stack kept shrinking. Eventually, it was just me and one other guy. Everyone knew I was tired and wanted to leave. He looked at me and said, We can stay here all night, just the 2 of us. Let's split it 50-50 and call it. Everyone agreed. It sounded fair. I glanced at my chips and said, No, 70-30. Everyone was shocked, but he actually caved. I went home with over $200. Story 21. After law school, I was working as an intern while waiting for my bar results. One day, I had to call a notoriously difficult opposing counsel to make a settlement offer. He was an absolute jerk on the phone and flat out refused to take my offer to his client, which, of course, is illegal. When I told him that, he demanded to know what law, which was absurd. As I calmly looked up the citation, he asked if I was an attorney. It was literally the day before bar results were released, and I had no idea whether I'd passed. Still, I replied, No, but I will be tomorrow. He immediately hung up on me. Later, when my supervisor called him, he said he refused to speak to anyone who wasn't an attorney. The next day, I got my results. I'd passed. I immediately filed my registration with the state bar to get my license number, and for some reason, mine was processed ahead of everyone else's, so I received it almost immediately. I had someone in my office swear me in right away instead of waiting for the formal ceremony. A week after that guy hung up on me, I mailed him the same settlement offer again, this time signed, Psychopoet Escarator. Story 22. My in-laws were shopping for a used car and eventually settled on a Crown Victoria with leather seats. According to my father-in-law, the salesman admitted that while the car was in good condition with only 27,000 miles on it, the driver's seat was badly worn and had a tear. The salesman assured them that all the seats would be recovered, so they'd match and have no damage. They specifically said they wanted leather, and the salesman agreed. Leather it would be. They worked out the rest of the deal, agreed on a price, and planned to return later to pick up the car. When they arrived, though, the seats had been redone in fabric, still at the price they'd agreed on for leather. The salesman then tried to smooth it over, saying something along the lines of, You've already put so much time into this. It's not that big of a deal, right? Trying to pressure them into taking it anyway. According to my mother-in-law, they had looked at several cars, and when she realized this one didn't have leather seats, she figured she must have mixed it up with another. So she said, This isn't the one with leather seats. Let's go get that one instead, grabbed her purse and started walking out. There wasn't actually another car they were considering, but the salesman didn't know that. According to my father-in-law, that's when the salesman suddenly realized just how badly he'd messed up. He quickly backpedaled, saying he'd have the seats recovered in leather by 4 o'clock that afternoon, and they could pick the car up then. My father-in-law recognized the brilliance of what had just happened. His own, "Don't give me that" approach wouldn't have worked nearly as well as her calm, matter-of-fact, "Let's go get the other one" response. She pulled it off effortlessly, because she wasn't bluffing or trying to sound angry. She genuinely thought she'd mixed up the cars. Story 23. I didn't want to have a story about myself, but the sweet satisfaction of this moment in my life is too good to pass up. I started at a company in 2014 as a temp. I was hired full-time in 2015 and got a couple of small raises heading into 2016. Then, at the start of that year, we got a new manager. At first, she seemed meticulous and friendly, but it didn't take long to realize she wasn't a great manager. I consistently had the best production numbers on the team and the highest satisfaction ratings from customers. But I didn't always stick to the scripts. I preferred to sound natural and actually connect with people. She didn't like that one bit. She started criticizing my work constantly because I wouldn't stick to the exact script for greetings and call endings. During one of her so-called performance reviews, she found out I didn't have a college degree, and she clearly didn't like that either. From then on, it felt like nothing I did was good enough. Eventually, the company announced that our department was being shut down, so we began discussing where I might transfer. That's when she told me flat out that I'd never get anywhere in the company without a college degree. Unfortunately, I believed her. So I started applying for positions in other departments, ones that were actually below my current pay grade. Every single one fell through. Out of frustration, I began applying for jobs I technically wasn't qualified for. By then, several coworkers had told me the same thing my manager had, that I needed to get a degree if I ever wanted a promotion. I started to believe it, until, against all odds, I got selected for a position that was a huge promotion and came with an even bigger raise. Meanwhile, the coworkers who'd transferred out all ended up making lateral moves. The satisfaction of telling her that I'd not only been promoted to a new position in another department, but was also the only person on her team to do so, was absolutely priceless. She looked like a deer in the headlights, completely stunned. It was beautiful. I moved on and thrived in that new role for a while, eventually earning another promotion into yet another department. Now, I'm in line for another move up before the end of the year. Still no college degree, and it turns out that's just fine. Story 24. Kind of my own power move, maybe. I was a business account manager for a large cellular service in the United States. Dealing with angry customers was part of the job. One man shouted at me for about 4 hours while I calmly tried to resolve his issue. I stayed professional, sweet, but authoritative, even as he swore at me, mocked my English accent, and threatened me. I finally told him his behavior was unacceptable and that he was upsetting me. He got so worked up he collapsed and had a seizure. That same day, I happened to be training a new employee. Poor kid was completely panicking. I told him to grab me a damp cloth from the bathroom while I pulled the man into the recovery position and talked to him through the seizure. Luckily for him, I used to be a nurse, so I knew exactly what to do. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't help thinking, I could have just let you hurt on your spit, you jerk. I'm from the UK. That's just how my brain works. When he came to, he was embarrassed and disoriented. I asked the usual medical questions, and a little while later, his wife arrived to pick him up. Turns out he often has stress-induced seizures. I documented everything that happened for the store records and got on with my day. Story 25. This happened just a few days ago, actually. The new Call of Duty was dropping on Friday, and my friend, a huge fan, was hyped for it. On Thursday, his boss came in and told him he had 2.5 weeks of unused vacation time that he needed to use up. My buddy immediately jumped at the chance to take Friday off so we could stay up late and play. But his manager said, "You can't request vacation days without 72 hours notice." Without missing a beat, my friend replied, "All right then, I'll either take tomorrow off or I'll take the rest of the month off in 72 hours. Needless to say, we spent all of Friday playing Call of Duty. Story 26. My friend is a tax lawyer who used to work as the resident tax guy at a big national law firm. The firm seriously underestimated him. He was wicked smart, the kind of person who could see through the entire tax code like it was a puzzle he'd already solved. They paid him $75,000 a year, but billed his time out at $450 an hour. Within 2 years of graduating law school, he was the top tax attorney in the state, handling Fortune 500 clients. When he asked for a raise, they offered him a 5% bump. He'd been thinking more along the lines of doubling his salary. They refused, so he walked. And when he left, all those massive clients followed him. Now, he works out of a room in his house, not even a proper office, representing some of the biggest companies in the country. The firm lost so much revenue that they eventually scrapped their entire tax division. These days, they just refer all their tax clients to him. Story 27. In my last job, I was doing the work of 2 people, and doing it well. I negotiated a small raise and thought I was on the right track, but later learned that even with the raise, I was the lowest paid person there. When they increased my responsibilities, I immediately asked for another raise and a title change to reflect that I was now doing the work of 3 people. I was told there was no room in the budget and that maybe, after 3 months of excellent performance, they could request a budget change from upper management. I then found out that someone who made more than me and did less work had received a raise. I sent an email stating that I wanted to discuss my compensation and that I believed a $10,000 raise was more appropriate given my current duties and output. They did not respond. After a week with no reply, I began aggressively looking for new jobs. I found one that pays $20,000 more and allows me to work from home. After accepting the offer, I went to the office that evening, packed up my things, and the next morning typed up my resignation and placed it on my boss's desk first thing. When the senior boss asked why this was happening and why I had not discussed it with them, I referenced the lack of room in the budget, the lack of response to the $10,000 figure, and politely explained that they could no longer afford my services. I later learned that they had already headhunted a new department head based heavily on the work I had done, turning my sub-department from a disaster into something reliably profitable, and that the entire plan fell apart when I left. They assigned 2 existing coworkers to cover my role and planned to hire an assistant. They also had to cancel contracts, and most of the contractors asked to follow me. I initially declined because of ethics, but once their contracts end, I am staying in polite contact. They could have kept the peace with a $10,000 raise for me, and instead, when I left, it took 2 employees at $45,000 each, plus discussions about hiring an assistant to fill the gap, and even then it was done less effectively. On top of that, they now need to hire new people to replace the employees moved into my former role. Ignoring that last email cost them roughly $55,000, plus the lost output of the program, plus the cost of an assistant if and when they manage to hire one, plus whatever happens to a department without a leader for however long it takes to find a new one. I have never experienced such professional vindication, and it is taking real effort to keep my ego in check. I'm sure it will pass. Learning the new company's idiosyncrasies is humbling, but the atmosphere is so much healthier. Story 28. In my last job, all of our work, installing cables and containment for fiber optics, was paid on a price work system. Each meter of cable, trunking, or other material had a set price, so we could usually estimate what the job would involve before we even arrived on site. There was also a fallback rate. If the amount of work in a given week was almost nothing, we would still receive a minimum payment. However, that minimum was calculated over the entire week rather than per day. My work partner and I were on different contracts. I received sick pay, whereas he did not. So, on days when the workload would earn us only about 50 pounds each, which could mean driving roughly 2.5 hours, doing the installation for maybe 2 hours, and then driving home again, I would take the day off sick. I ended up making more money that way than I would have by actually going in, and my colleague would receive double the job's price. That amount was more than his fallback rate, but he still had to do the work. There was one stretch where I took 3 days off sick on fallback pay. It was not great, but it was still better than going in for 3 days and earning less than half of what I would have made by staying home. Story 29. There were a lot of things we couldn't do in an SR-71, but we were the fastest guys in the sky, and we loved reminding our fellow aviators of that fact. People often asked whether flying the jet was fun because of its speed. Fun wasn't the first word I would have chosen. Intense, maybe. Even cerebral. But there was one day during our time in the sled when I would honestly say it was pure fun to be the fastest crew out there, if only for a moment. It happened while Walt and I were flying our final training sortie. We needed 100 hours in the jet to complete our training and earn mission-ready status. Somewhere over Colorado, we passed that milestone. After making our turn in Arizona, the jet was performing flawlessly. My gauges in the front seat were perfectly steady, and we were starting to feel pretty good about ourselves. Not just because real missions were finally within reach, but because after 10 months of humbling simulators and endless study, we had gained real confidence in the aircraft. As we ripped across the barren desert, 80,000 feet below us, I could already see the California coast from the Arizona border. For the first time, I felt fully ahead of the jet. I was starting to feel a bit sorry for Walter in the backseat. He had no real view of the incredible sights in front of us and was stuck monitoring 4 different radios. It was good practice for him on real missions. A priority transmission from headquarters could be critical, but it still felt like he was missing out. It had also been an adjustment for me to relinquish control of the radios. Throughout my entire flying career, I had always handled my own transmissions. But in this aircraft, the division of duties was clear, and I had learned to accept it. I still insisted on taking the radios while we were on the ground, though. Walt was excellent at many things, but he couldn't match my ability to sound smooth on the airwaves, a skill sharpened by years in fighter squadrons, where even the slightest radio misstep was grounds for metaphorical beheading. He understood that, and he let me keep that small luxury. Just to get a sense of what Walt had to deal with, I flipped the radio toggle switches and monitored the frequencies along with him. Most of the chatter came from Los Angeles Center far below, managing the daily traffic in their sector. Although we appeared on their scope, if only for a moment, we were in uncontrolled airspace and normally would not speak to them unless we needed to descend into their jurisdiction. We listened as the shaky voice of a lone Cessna pilot asked Center for a readout of his ground speed. Center answered, "November, Charlie 175. I'm showing you at 90 knots on the ground." The thing to understand about center controllers is that whether they were talking to a rookie pilot in a Cessna or to Air Force One, they always used the same calm, deep professional tone that made everyone feel important. I always called it the Houston center voice. After years of watching documentaries on the space program and hearing that cool, steady voice from Houston controllers, I became convinced that every controller in the country tried to sound just like that, and most of them succeeded. No matter what part of the country we were flying over, it always felt as if the same guy was talking. Over the years, that tone became a comforting sound to pilots everywhere. And conversely, pilots always wanted to make sure that when we transmitted, we sounded like Chuck Yeager, or at least John Wayne. Better to die than sound bad on the radios. Just moments after the Cessna's inquiry, a Twin Beach chimed in on the frequency, using a slightly superior tone as he asked for his ground speed. Center replied, "I have you at 125 knots on the ground." I could almost hear the Beechcraft pilot polishing his ego, convinced he was dazzling his Cessna brethren. Then, out of nowhere, a Navy F-18 pilot from NAS Lemoore came on the frequency. You could tell instantly he was a Navy jock. He sounded effortlessly cool on the radio. "Center, Dusty 5-2, ground speed check." Before Center even replied, I found myself thinking, "Come on, Dusty 5-2, you've got a ground speed indicator in that $1 million cockpit. Why are you asking Center for a readout?" And then it clicked. Dusty wanted to make sure that every bug smasher from Mount Whitney to the Mojave understood what real speed looked like. He was the fastest guy in the valley that day, and he wanted everyone else to know just how much fun he was having in his new Hornet. Center's response came in that same calm, steady, almost musical voice, more alliteration than emotion. "Dusty 5-2, Center, we have you at 620 on the ground." And I thought to myself, is this a ripe situation? Or what? My hand instinctively reached for the mic button, and I had to remind myself that Walt was in charge of the radios. Still, I felt it had to be done. Within seconds, we'd be out of the sector, and the opportunity would be gone forever. That Hornet needed to be humbled, and it needed to happen now. I ran through all our simulator training in my mind and how important it was that we function as a solid crew. Jumping in on the radios at that moment would undermine everything we had worked to build. I was torn. Somewhere, 13 miles above Arizona, there was a pilot silently screaming inside his space helmet, and then I heard it. The click of the mic button from the back seat. That was the moment I knew Walter and I had truly become a crew. With complete professionalism and absolutely no emotion, Walter said, "Los Angeles Center, Aspen 20. Can you give us a ground speed check?" There was no hesitation. The reply came in the same calm tone, as if this were the most ordinary request in the world. "Aspen 20, I show you at 1,842 knots across the ground." I think it was the 42 knots that I liked best, so precise, so confident. You could tell Center was proud to deliver that number without the slightest hesitation, and you just knew he was smiling. But the exact moment I realized Walt and I were going to be good friends for a long time was when he keyed the mic again, and in his best fighter pilot voice said, Center, much thanks. We're showing closer to 1,900 on the money." For that moment, Walter was a god. And for the first time, we heard a tiny crack in the smooth, invincible Houston center voice when LA replied, "Roger that, Aspen. Your equipment is probably more accurate than ours. You boys have a good one." It all lasted only a few moments, but in that brief, unforgettable sprint across the Southwest, the Navy had been scorched. Every mortal airplane on the frequency had been forced to bow before the King of Speed. And most importantly, Walter and I had crossed the threshold into becoming a true crew. A fine day's work. We never heard another transmission on that frequency for the rest of the flight to the coast. For that one day, it really was fun being the fastest guys out there. Story 30. My long-distance girlfriend of over 2 years was in town to visit, and we were driving on the highway. A high-end SUV was behind us, really behind us, absolutely. Tailgating, even though I was going the speed limit and wasn't in the passing lane. So I did what I usually do when someone tailgates me. I pulled the trigger for the windshield wiper fluid sprayers. At the right speed, it sends a nice mist straight onto the windshield of the car behind me. The power move began when they pulled to the right to go around us, and I jokingly told my girlfriend she should flip them off. She immediately said, "Okay," and stuck her middle finger up, staring straight at them as they passed. They got in front of us and hit their windshield wiper sprayers, sending a spray across my windshield. I just stared straight ahead, didn't touch my own wiper trigger, and kept driving as they sped off. My girlfriend just went, "Oh crap." Story 31. At my school for about a year, there was this inside joke where you'd go up to someone wearing a hoodie, yank it over their face, and shout, for no particular reason, "You're a limousine." And yes, this was middle school, so we definitely knew what a limousine was. Anyway, one day 2 guys and I were goofing around trying to get each other with it when my science teacher suddenly walked up and did it to me. No hesitation, no restraint, just full commitment. It didn't hurt or anything, but in that moment I felt completely obliterated. In a fun way, like when you get absolutely wrecked in Smash. In fact, I might have had some of the greatest teachers to ever live when I was in middle school. One time, we were outside building quinzies, little snow shelters, in outdoor ed, and no one really felt like doing it. So, a group of about 8 guys started having a painfully cringy rap battle instead. Then, the teacher walked over and actually roasted them back, in verse. The rhyme wasn't great, but the fact that he bothered at all was hilarious. And it worked. After a few seconds of aggressive screaming and shouts of, "Oh, get sat on!" the guys just quietly went back to building. I even had a teacher who had once been a provincial candidate and had a scandal where he was accused of bribing other candidates up to $10,000. Naturally, we made fun of him a lot. He had this way of saying "stop it" that just sounded hilarious, and when he was chewing someone out, he'd often give commands that completely contradicted each other, all in one breath. "Stop it. Hey, sit down, get up, sit down, stop it, get up." One time, he asked a kid to take some things outside, and the kid just looked him dead in the eye and said, "Are you going to give me $10,000? He had never told us about his past escapades, but he had a Wikipedia page, so we knew. I didn't get to see what happened next, unfortunately, but I still admire the sheer level of madman energy it took to say that out loud. This next one is from school, too. My friend had gotten into a fight with this really annoying girl. I don't remember exactly why, but I think it started when he threw some food at her table. She completely lost it and started throwing food, and even drinks, back in his general direction. Long story short, we all got sent to the office, even though I hadn't been part of it at all. It was that guilt by association stuff they pull when they've had a bad day and want to vent at more kids. Then another friend showed up, even though he wasn't in trouble for anything. The 3 of us could not take a single part of the situation seriously. Everything about it felt too ridiculous. So we were laughing and barely listening to a word the vice principal was saying. Eventually, the 3rd guy started cracking Judge Judy jokes, and I even played the theme song on my Bluetooth speaker. In the office. Honestly, half my school was just one giant meme. There were definitely some salty intellectuals, but I'm not even talking about grades, just the way people acted. A lot of us on the meme side got along really well. My sister went to the same school before I did, and she has the ultimate power move story. I wasn't there for it, though. There was this really terrible sub that my sister's drama teacher would sometimes call in. And I mean horrible. She would actually scream, literally scream at students when she got angry. and she got angry over the most ridiculous things. One time, she sent a guy into the hall for fidgeting with his fingers. Even the regular teacher knew how bad she was. She'd threatened the class by saying she would call that sub in if they did something she didn't like. And honestly, the regular teacher wasn't great either. Well, one day, she made the mistake of telling the class exactly when that awful sub was coming. So, naturally, my sister skipped class. But that's not the fun part. The fun part is what her friends told her afterward. They all brought pop and food, and they basically threw a chill little party right in the middle of the classroom for the entire hour during drama class, while the sub was supposed to be teaching. I have no idea what the sub did or even could have done. There isn't much a teacher can do when the entire class just collectively decides to ignore you and hang out instead. I never found out exactly how she reacted, but come on, tell me that's not a power move. Man, I miss all the good ones. Story 32. My dad occasionally reminds me of this whenever he wants a good laugh. Personally, I don't see it as much of a power play, more like me being an 8-year-old idiot. When I was about 8, we were having a family gathering at my aunt's house. There was a big spread of food laid out on the dining table, and I was hungry, so I started reaching across the table to grab as much food and as much variety as I could. Looking back, it was definitely not polite. My grandmother noticed. She's a very stern but fair woman, and she suddenly grabbed the hand I was using to reach for food and told me, "It's better to use your tongue to get food." She meant that I should ask an adult politely if I wanted something. I took her completely literally and said, "Oh, okay." Then I stuck my tongue out toward the food and flicked it upward as if I were trying to scoop up whatever was being served. My mom, dad, aunts, uncles, grandfather, and cousins all saw it and immediately burst out laughing. My grandmother went red in the face and started telling me off. Without meaning to, I made her look a bit ridiculous by taking her words at face value. Like I said, I don't really think of it as a power move, but it definitely stands out as the time I accidentally made my gran look like an idiot. Story 33. When I was in high school, I worked as a cart pusher at the local Walmart. Basically, everyone left their carts everywhere except the corral, and I went around gathering them up and pushing them back to the front so customers could grab one. I was good at the job. I always cleared the lot during my first hour or so, then spent the rest of my shift picking up carts one or two at a time and helping people load things into their cars. Back then, our store wasn't open 24 hours, and I usually worked the closing shift. Depending on the time of year, that meant I could spend a few hours messing around in a dim, quiet parking lot, getting paid while business slowed down. And because I'd already cleared the lot, there wasn't much left to do. My buddy B was a cashier at the time, and when the store started closing, he'd get sent outside to help me push carts, which basically meant we both got to mess around. One night, as we were walking a single cart back up from the far end of the lot, I turned to B and said, "Hey man, what's the capital of Bangkok?" Then I sack-tapped him pretty hard. He doubled over, and when he finally stood back up, he said, "You're supposed to ask, what's the capital of Thailand?" I immediately shot back, "Bangkok," and tapped him again. This time, he went all the way to the ground. After I helped him up, he looked at me and said, "I'm not even mad. That was good." Power move. Story 34. A family member's first husband was an anesthesiology student, resident, trainee, something along those lines, at a prestigious medical school. He was also a narcotics addict. One day, he went into the storeroom to steal some fentanyl and then headed to the bathroom to shoot up. He sat down, stuck the needle in, and immediately collapsed, completely paralyzed. What he thought was fentanyl was actually Pavilon, a paralytic. Someone heard the fall and found him on the floor, unable to move or breathe, with the needle still in his arm. They called the crash cart and started resuscitating him. Thinking it was a narcotics overdose, the nurse gave him Narcan, which instantly clears narcotics from your system. But Pavilon isn't a narcotic, so nothing happened. The nurse wrote down, "Narcan administered, no effect." They eventually managed to bring him back. Later, the school kicked him out for narcotics abuse. He took them to court and produced the record showing that Narcan had no effect, which technically proved he hadn't used narcotics, conveniently ignoring that he had tried to. They paid him $50,000 to go away. Story 35. Taking advantage of the fact that the place I worked was understaffed, had terrible turnover, and that I'd been temporarily transplanted there for a couple of weeks to train people, which quietly became my full-time position, I pulled my manager aside and told him that every day I showed up, I was gracing them with my presence. I told him that if they didn't promote me, I'd start looking for another job. I'm a pretty beta guy, and he was a young, successful, confident dude. He did not see it coming. He started sweating bullets. I got promoted. At another job, I was on a hardscaping crew with 2 other guys. I was new and didn't get along with one of them. Something about me just drove him up the wall. He blamed my work ethic, but none of my other coworkers believed that. One day he pulled some nonsense and then put on this bright, fake cheery voice and said something like, "We're gonna kick it into high gear today, aren't we, Gonzo?" I said, "Sure thing." And he snapped back, "No, Gonzo, don't say sure thing. Say, yes, we're going to kick it into high gear." I don't remember exactly what I said in that first moment, but it wasn't submissive, just not exactly standing up for myself either. So we get to the job, start working, and immediately he starts in again, telling me to move faster or whatever. I turned to the other guy and said, "Hey, do you find me helpful?" He looked confused and said, "What?" And I went on, "John doesn't find me helpful. And if neither of you find me helpful, that's fine, because I am totally happy to walk home and let you two finish this patio without me getting in the way. Honestly, I'd love to go home right now. My girlfriend's waiting for me, and I'd way rather be getting laid than pushing wheelbarrows full of rocks. So, if I'm a burden, just say the word, and I'll leave you to it." I almost never stand up for myself, so this caught him completely off guard. He suddenly got meek and asked me, please, not to leave. He told me I was helpful and told the other guy to keep his mouth shut. I didn't stay at that job much longer, but I never heard another word of crap from John for the rest of the season. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.